Hi, it's Justin from Spalted Stack Studio. I'm going to change things up in this video and show you how to mill some wood. So before we can actually take anything to the joiner and start, we need to assess our lumber. This piece is about 8 foot long. So we want to look for any twisting or any kind of bow. As you can see, there's a little bit of a bow, and there is also a slight twist. The bow is about 1/8 of an inch. So when we run this on the joiner, just to get this one side flat, we're going to have to remove 1/8 inch from here and from here to get this flat. Now when we're running through the planer, we're also going to remove 1/8 inch from here. That's a little too much. We don't want to remove that quite that much. So what we can do is cut it down so it's not quite as long. This will help not lose so much material when we run it through the joiner, and it also makes it easier to handle. So we don't want to cut it down exactly what we need. We're going to have about 6 inches of snipe on the planer, so we need to add 6 inches. So each piece we run through the planer is going to lose about 6 inches. So we want to get as many pieces out of a board as we can without having to remove too much on the planing and joining side. So what I'll do is more than likely just cut it in half. And then that'll also, when I cut that, you'll see that this gap almost disappears. So we're only going to end up losing maybe a 1/16 on each side, which is a lot better. So as you can see, there's much less gap now that we got it cut. We still got a twist, and a twist is kind of the worst thing to deal with on the joiner. So we're still going to lose a little bit of material, but we'll make it work. Check this side too. So as you can see, this side is high, and then this side is also high. But we'll just have to be careful on the joiner, and we'll get that nice and flat. We're going to do the same thing with the poplar. This is actually for a different project, but I'm going to be doing both of them at the same time. So the poplar is pretty flat. So in theory, I could just run this whole board through the joiner and planer, and I really wouldn't remove too much material. But I don't want to do that. Running 8-foot boards through the joiner it's a little exhausting. So we'll still cut this down and make sure it's in an interval for the pieces I need. In this case, I need 2 15-inch pieces. So we'll go ahead and cut this down to 37 inches. Okay, so I have an 8-inch joiner. That means my bed and my blades are 8 inches. So the max I can cut on this is, of course, going to be 8 inches. This lumber is 8 3/4. So it's not really, especially because this is twisted, it's not safe to cut that remaining amount off on the table saw. So we'll go ahead and take it to the bandsaw, make a safe cut, and cut this down to a little less than 8 inches. I always like to do it under because my fence sits a little bit over the blades. So I'll go ahead and cut this down to 7 3/4. Something else that we need to take note of, and I have a helical head, a helical cutter head, which means it has a bunch of carbide blades that are at a slight angle, so that way they slice off the wood instead of pretty much chopping it like a straight edge blade would. So some older ones and cheaper ones will just have 3 or 4 blades that are just straight. Those are a little rougher, and if you do have a straight knife, you have to be careful about your grain. The blade will be rotating this way. So if we have our wood and the blade's rotating this way and our grain is, say, going like this, we're going to get a bunch of tear out.
Right.
So you want to flip it like this, so that way that grain would be going like this. That was drastic. That way when that blade hits it, it's pushing the grain down as opposed to ripping it down. Now with the helical heads, I don't really worry about grain direction very much. Those things do fantastic either way. So unless I have some really figured wood, I might get a little bit of tear out, but it's normally not enough to worry about and sit there and take all the time aligning my wood grade. But if you have or are using a joiner that has the straight knives, you definitely need to take the time and set all your pieces up so that way you're feeding them through the correct direction. The same thing is going to apply when we're using the planer. Now I have a DeWalt 13-inch planer, and that does come with straight knives. So when I first got that, I did really have to pay attention to my wood grain direction, because that thing would tear apart the wood if you fed it the wrong direction. I've since upgraded to the helical head on that as well, which gives a much better finish, and it also doesn't give the tear out. So if you have it, definitely consider upgrading to the helical heads. They are just superior in every way to a straight blade. Okay, now we can move to the planer, which if you're just starting out and you can't have both, I would definitely get the planer, because you can make a jig to turn the planer into a joiner as well. However, you can't turn a joiner into a planer. So this does have a little more versatility towards it than the joiner does, but I have both, so I'm going to go over both. So the side that we just flattened on the joiner is going to go down, and we're going to feed it through the planer. The planer has a wheel, then a blade, and then another wheel. Those 2 wheels are going to feed the wood into the blade. When we first put the wood through, it's going to hit that wheel and then hit the blade. That is going to cause your snipe. Same thing when it's exiting. It's going to go off the first wheel, hit the blade, and now you only have the exit wheel hitting it. That's going to cause your exit snipe. Now, if this is perfectly tuned and your tables are all at the perfect height, you can mitigate snipe. However, it doesn't take very much to get that snipe, so I always account for it. And that's just to be safe. I don't have to ruin an entire piece. I'd rather just sacrifice the 6 inches or use the scrap for other pieces if I don't get it. Either way, I think it's better just to account for it. And yeah, the rest of it's pretty straightforward. Again, this has the helical head onto it, so I don't really need to focus on grain direction very much. But if you just get one and you get the base model, it's definitely going to have the straight knives. So make sure you're setting up your wood before you start feeding it to have the appropriate grain direction. So to start, now a good idea, especially if you're doing a bunch of lumber at once, is to set your wood next to each other and see if you got any height differences. So this one is a little bit thicker than this one, so I'll take this one, and then I'm going to go to the poplar, do the same thing. The poplar's a little bit thicker. Put this here. Do it for this one. these are the same. So I'll go ahead and just start with this one. So what I like to do is open this up until I can feed the wood through nice and easy. Oops. Give it a full turn, which is a 1/16 of an inch. Try it again. Give it another full turn. I'm just going to do this until I can't push it through anymore. Okay, right there. So I know that is engaged. I'll go ahead and give it 1/2 turn from that. All right, let me get my ear protection on and we can go ahead and start. So before I start, I'm going to go over one more thing. When we're dimensioning our lumber, we want to take off equal amounts off each side, or at least close to it. So what I like to do is when I'm feeding this through, once I get a clean side, and I know this side is completely flat, then as I'm feeding it, getting everything else flat, I'll start rotating it every turn. So that way I'm taking off the same. If you don't, then say the center of this board in here is got a little more moisture in it than the rest because it's not completely acclimated to your shop or whatever. If we take everything off one side, say this is an inch and we take it down to 3/4, we take a quarter off this side. Well, this side is closer to the middle now, so you're going to have a difference in moisture content, and that can cause your board to twist or bow or whatever. So you want to try to take off the same amount of material off of each side. Now that I got all the lumber flat, what I like to do is just go ahead and sticker it, and we'll let it sit as long as possible. I would like to say that I let it sit for a couple days, but that's just not going to happen. The longer you let it sit, the better. And what we're going to do is before we dimension it to its final thickness, I want to let it sit and see if it moves at all. So I'll check it and make sure it's still nice and flat. If it's still nice and flat, we're good to go and we can start making our project. If it moves, we should still have enough thickness to hit it on the joiner again and send it through the planer. So we're hoping that doesn't happen. If it gets real bad, we're just not going to use that lumber. We're going to have to start with some new lumber and start fresh. So again, the longer you let it sit, the better. Unfortunately, I don't have that much storage for lumber, so I have to get this as I build my projects, and I just don't have the time to let it sit for 1 or 2 weeks, which is really probably what I should let it do. But it's just not realistic for how much I push out. For the stickers, I just use 1/2 inch plywood that I cut down. Normally 3 is fine. You want 1 in the middle, 2 on your sides. Now I have different lengths. Normally when you have the same lengths, you want to make sure your stickers are right above each other or at least close, within a couple inches. So obviously I can't do that, so I'm just going to go ahead and move my sides over. Now if you have a bunch of lumber, you probably don't want to do this because we don't want the weight of the lumber pushing down and warping this wood. So we want to keep them kind of close to the same size, but these are within a couple inches. I think we'll be fine. These ones I will do separate because these ones are quite a bit shorter.
See.
This is, you can see there's a little bit of wobble there, so it might be this.
There you go.
Okay, good. All right, so we'll let this sit. In my case, I'm going to let it sit a day, maybe 2, and then I'll finish squaring it up. I've never really had a problem with my lumber moving after I do this. I get my lumber from a local place that's right down the street, so it's pretty well acclimated to my environment, so I don't have to worry too much about it moving. I've had some issues with some poplar moving quite a bit, but thankfully it was a piece that didn't get used for something. It was sitting up on the rack and I noticed it. But as far as projects go, I've never had anything warp on me or anything like that. So I'm going to stick with this method because it seems to work, and yeah, haven't any problems, so why change it? Okay, so we got something like this. So here would be perfectly flat. Now obviously we've got a pretty big gap here. So as we're running through the joiner, we're going to be removing material from both sides until we get past the bow. So say we're somewhere around here. So we would have to, whatever that gap is, we're going to have to remove that amount and a little bit more to get this nice and flat. So if you have, say, a 1/16 inch gap, your final thickness here is going to be a 1/16 less. So now when we go to send it to the planer and get this flat, so say we started off with, this was originally 1 inch. So now over here, we're down to 15/16 thickness from here to here. So now we're going to have to remove that off the top to get to here. So you'll lose whatever that gap is. You're going to lose that and a little more to get your lumber flat. So if it's something that is like a 1/4 inch gap, you're going to be moving way too much material to justify doing that whole piece. So you're better off just cutting it in half if you can. If not, you might as well just save that piece for some smaller projects, because using it on a larger project just isn't feasible. So we always need to consider that when we're looking at the lumber before we start cleaning up and using it on a project. So this isn't going to be used for this project. I pulled this down because it has a bad bow, so I can really show you what's going on. And this actually also has a slight twist to it, but we're going to focus on the bow. So in order to make this flat, we'll have to remove material from both sides until we start removing material here where the peak of the bow is. And that bow is at its highest about 3/8. So that means we're going to have to remove 3/8, at least 3/8 of material. We're going to remove more than that to get this part flat. And then we'll have to remove some up here too. So if this material is 1 inch thick, we're going to be left with 5/8 thick material, which isn't really reasonable. That's a lot of lost material. So for long pieces, this would not be a suitable piece of lumber. In order to mitigate that loss, we're going to have to cut this into smaller pieces. Now we'll lose less on the planing and joining, but we will lose more material because of snipe. So anytime you send a board through the planer, you're going to get about 3 inches of snipe on each side. Now that doesn't always happen. You can tune your planer in and get it to where it doesn't really get snipe, but there's still that risk that's there. So I always account for it because I don't want to ruin an entire board over the snipe. I'd rather just sacrifice the 6 inches. So if we were to plane this whole board the way it is, and it was flatter, we'd lose a total of 6 inches on this board. Now if we cut it into 3 pieces, we're going to lose 18 inches of snipe. So there's always this balance of how much am I going to lose from the planing and how much am I going to lose through the snipe. In this case, this is a very bad bow, so we don't really have any other choice other than to cut this in multiple pieces. Okay, I went and cut this in half. So now, on this board, which is the worst one, trying to get one we're down to about 1/4 of an inch bow. A little more reasonable than the 5/8 we were at before. And this one doesn't have much of a bow at all. So this one is going to be minimal loss. This one would probably have to be used for a project that's something around between 5/8 and 3/4. This will get just below 3/4 when I get it all finished. Another issue you're going to have with the joiner is going to be a board that's twisted. So if you look, we got this corner is high, this corner is touching, and then the opposite corner is high on this side. So we got a fairly nasty twist. So again, to get this flat, we have to measure this. If it would help if I use the right side of the ruler. And it's 1/4 inch there, and it's probably, oh, it's really bad over here. And we're about 3/8 over here. Now where a bow is, there's not much problem running that on a joiner, as long as you don't push too hard on it. With a twist, you have to be much more careful about how you push it on the joiner because it can rock. So you'd essentially be just going with the twist and it won't ever be flat. So with a twist, and in this case this board is 8 3/4. So in a bow, we cut it cross cut. That gives us, and it helps mitigate our bow. With the twist, instead of doing it, we're still going to do that because we don't want to push this long of a board through it. But instead we want to do a rip cut. So that will minimize how much material we're losing off the planing, because instead of having this twist that rocks, we'll get a board that's going to sit a little more flat. It'll still have its, like, a slight bow to it, but it's a lot easier to work with than this twist is. $76. So 38. and 8 3/4. So let's do 4 7/8.
What you want?
Okay. Can you turn the dust collection on, please?
Okay.
Okay, so we went through from a heavily twisted board that was going to lose probably some. Now this one's still a little twisted, but it's not that bad. And if we go this side, it's, yeah, see? But this is a lot easier to work with than what we had. And this side should be pretty flat. Yeah. So this side's pretty flat. So we went from losing something that was going to be probably 3/8 to something that's more like an 8 by doing that way. Now, if you need a wider board, what we can do is mark our setup, how we had it. So we need to take it back to how it was, and I lost it because I'm an idiot. Is it like that? No. That's right. It's like this. All right. So if we keep the board how it was when we ripped it down, we can just make a mark on your ends of the two pieces where they're joining at, where they were joined at, I should say. So after we clean these all up, we can just glue this back together and it'll be nice and flat. And if you do a good job on your edges where it's going to be glued, you may not even see your glue joint. So this would look like a single piece of wood again, which is a lot of work, but if you need to use that lumber that was in bad shape, this is kind of the procedure you have to take. Okay, we let this wood sit with stickers overnight. And again, the more you let this sit, the better, but I'm kind of on a deadline, so I can't let it sit that long. Now what I'm looking for is any kind of bow, any kind of movement. You want to put it on something nice and flat, which my workbench is very flat, so it's a good reference point. So this is all good. It doesn't look like anything moved. Another thing you can do I already started taking the stickers out of this, but if you start from the bottom and wiggle your stickers, as long as you're on a flat surface and you're getting resistance on your stickers, you should be good. So now I will take these back to the planer, plane everything down to their final thicknesses, and then we'll move to the joiner again. Now we'll be working on the edge of our stock. So we only got about 3/4 of an inch that's going to be contacting our blade. I don't like to keep my fence in the same position for this. I'll move it to a random spot. That way we're not just constantly wearing these two blades out. If we do this every time we do an edge, these two blades are going to get more resistance or more wear than everything else. So I just like to loosen everything up, and we'll just move it to the next set of blades. So tighten it up. Anytime I move the fence, I like to check to make sure it's still square. Good. And we can go ahead and start. So when we first did the board, we weren't really worrying about this fence at all. We were only focused on the bed. So we only had one reference point. Now that we're doing the edge, we're going to have 2 reference points. We need to make sure that when we're cutting, that the edge is perfectly 90 degrees to our flat side. So we'll be referencing the fence with our flat side, and at the same time using the methods that we did earlier to reference the edge as we cut it to this flat side. And we'll feed it through, constantly making sure that we are against both this fence and the tabletop. Get that side done on the joiner. You want to be careful not to run your hand down your lumber on that side you just cleaned up. These corners are going to get very sharp since they're freshly clean and haven't been dinged up or anything, so just keep that in mind. You can grab it fine, but if you slide your hand down it, it's very likely going to cut. So now what I'm going to do is kick over my fence, and I want to take off just enough material that the saw blade makes contact with this wood all the way down. We're going to do that for each board, which means we'll probably have to move the fence around. And then we're going to do the same thing for this side. When you run on the joiners, you can get little vibration marks. My saw blade cleans it up a little better than that, so I like to run the saw blade on both sides. And then I can get ready to actually cut it for my project. Okay, so you may ask, can you just do both sides on the joiner to square it up? We'll do this side and flip it over and do this side, and you can't. So the joiner just gets your side flat. So say we flatten this side out, and it comes something like this. We come over here and do the same thing when we go on in here, but instead of this side being high, this side's high. So now you have a board that varies in thick and width. The joiner will not make sides parallel to each other. They can only make a flat side. So that's why you have to take it to your table saw, because you're referencing your flat side to a blade that is parallel with that. So you can only use a joiner to make 2 of your sides flat. If you try to use it on all 4 sides, you're just going to end up with a piece of wood that varies in thickness and width. Okay, now we have some nice square stock, and we can start building our project. This is one of the things that many people who don't do woodworking don't realize how much work has to be put in before we even start building anything. So this was maybe an hour of work to get this completely done. That's with video recording, so that takes some of the time. Without video, I probably have about 20 minutes, and that has to be spread over a couple days. So there is some effort into just getting your stock nice and flat that people don't realize. Anyways, that concludes the video, and I really hope you learned something new about milling your wood. I also want to apologize for not pushing out content in a timely manner. The shop has gotten really busy lately, and it's becoming really difficult to take the time to record content and then edit it. It's becoming kind of a back burner project at the moment, and hopefully in the future I can combine the two and make good content and also be able to produce the things I normally do out of the shop. And if you haven't yet, please take time to like and subscribe, and I appreciate you watching.